Wait, turn your mic on. The mic is muted.
There you go.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Well, any introduction by way of passing some time, so Coach, just go ahead.
I couldn't make that out, Steve, but am I properly introduced?
Yes.
Well, sorry for the delay here. Let me just thank Steve and the other organizers and say how privileged I am to be following Bob and Brother Mickey and my friend Arthur Waskow. Now, I was not able to hear Rabbi Waskow, so I hope that even though there's a very big danger that we'll be saying the same things because we think the same way, that I will be saying something new and different, and I made an effort to do that. Now, picking up on Mickey, he had a couple of vignettes about Pope John the 23rd. I want to add two more because this is a pretty somber subject overall, given the situation we're in now. And I think we need every now and then to have a little laugh. When Pope John the 23rd was asked, he was sitting next to an interviewer on the bench in the Vatican Park there. He was asked, well, Pope, your eminence, or your whatever it is, your holiness, how many people work in here? And he turned to the interviewer and he said, well, about half of them. I hate Zoom because I can never hear if anybody laughed. All right, here's one more. Brother Mickey talked a little bit about the rigidity of the pre-Vatican II church. You won't believe this, but I was alive then, and I remember it well. There was a seminarian studying at North Berkeley College in Rome, and he was all spit and polish and really, really obeying all the rules. And so he goes to an Italian restaurant shortly after he arrives to study there. And he says, now, it's Friday, no meat in the tomato sauce. Got that? And he says, oh, see. So serves the meal, and my friend says, there's meat in the tomato sauce. It's Friday. And the waiter said, sí. Católico, sí. Fanático, no. So my friend learned right there that not only Pope John the 23rd was not a fanatical, not living in the past, but even simple Italian waiters, okay? Keep that in mind. And, you know, I have a lot to thank John the 23rd for, because he persuaded me to follow his instructions and not only open the windows, but open the doors and get out to meet people like Arthur Waskow and Bob. I haven't met Mickey yet, but I hope to someday soon. So it's an honor to be following them. And it also seems to me to be entirely right and just that we pay tribute to Michael Doyle, who was a longtime pastor of Sacred Heart Church, all right? And last time I was up there speaking, actually 9 years ago, he gave me this book. I hope you can see the title here. It's a terrible day, thanks be to God. It's a collection of his writings. It's wonderful. And in the introduction, he talks about what the terrible day is. He says, my grandfather, Pat Doyle, loved the land more than any man I ever met. His big hands held the plow, and his big horses stretched their strength until they were wet with sweat and with rain. He braved the weather with fierce determination and was the last one to leave the field. Unbuckling his team, he hung their dripping harnesses on the wall, wiped the wetness from his steaming face, and said, "It's a terrible day, thanks be to God." Nice inscription here from Michael Doyle. God be with you every day, and especially on a day that's terrible. We are on a terrible day. And I think that Michael Doyle would be the first to say, let's get real. I'm going to propose a moment of silence. And I will try to set the tone by reminding you all of the fact that 12,000 children have been killed in Gaza. That this genocide, duly called that by the International Court of Justice, is enabled by our Catholic president. I will recite now some words from Matthew and from Jeremiah, which pertain to what's going on in Rafah today. A voice is heard in Rafah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. I would ask for a whole minute of silence while we reflect on this real thing. I have learned a lot from the Hebrew prophets and from more later day saints, the Jewish prophets like Rabbi Waskow. Here's Rabbi Heschel, who is very, very active in civil rights movement and other justice issues. He said, when evil happens, not all of us are guilty, but all of us are responsible. Indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. Now, we'll get to Pachim and Taras, but I want to just set the stage from the last genocide. 6 million Jews, they say, during the Third Reich. There was a similar silence. No one could find their voice. Albert Camus noticed this and complained bitterly. And so very progressive Dominicans invited him to address them at this monastery and tell them what he thought of the role of the church during World War II, during the genocide. This is just a paragraph of what Camus told these Dominicans. This was 1948, just 3 years after the war. For a long time during those frightful years, I waited for a great voice to speak up in Rome. In Rome, I, an unbeliever? Precisely. For I knew that the spirit would be lost if it did not utter a cry of condemnation with when faced with force. It seemed that a voice did speak up. But I assure you that millions of men and women, like me, did not hear it. And that at the time, believers and unbelievers alike shared a solitude that continued to spread as the days went by and the executioners multiplied. It has been explained to me since that this condemnation was indeed voiced, but it was in the style of an encyclical, which is not all that clear. The condemnation was voiced, but it was not understood. Whose fault is that? What the world expects of Christians is that Christians should speak out loud and clear, and that they should voice their condemnation in such a way that never any doubt, never the slightest doubt, could rise in the heart of the simplest man, that they should get away from abstraction and confront the blood-stained face history has taken on today. And finally, what I know, which sometimes creates a deep longing in me, is that if Christians made up their mind to it, millions of voices, millions, I say, throughout the world, would be added to the appeal of a handful of isolated individuals who, without any sort of affiliation, today intercede almost everywhere and ceaselessly for children. Now, there are encyclicals and there are encyclicals. There are some that are rhetoric because they are not propounded from the pulpit, as was the case with this encyclical from the Pope during World War II. But then there are good ones. There are ones that plant seeds in willing ears and willing minds like those of John F. Kennedy. I talk, of course, of Pacem in Terris, which is a breakthrough. Now, I would just like to remind people that Pacem in Terris was published on April 11th, 1963. I had been drawn down to Washington by John Kennedy after his inaugural address, where he said, "Don't ask what your country will do for you, ask what you will do for your country." Okay. For those younger, that didn't sound corny at the time. That was the real deal. There were lots of us came down to Washington at that time. As a matter of fact, I entered government service 3 days after the encyclical was pronounced. No, 3 days before, actually, April 8th. Now, I have to point out in an ecumenical strain here that it wasn't just Pacem in Terris that set John F. Kennedy on the right path. Earlier seeds had been planted in him by 6 Quakers who had vigiled and vigiled and vigiled in front of the White House and in front of the Congress. They were planting seeds. One of them is a good friend of mine. David Hartsoe is his name, and he was with these 6 on the morning of May 1st, 1962 now, okay? A year earlier. Now, they vigiled so long and hard that President Kennedy said, "Well, let them in. Let me hear what they have to say." Kennedy began, "Yeah, I've read some of your letters," and right off the bat, okay. Despite what the Navy has told you, we're not going to name a nuclear submarine, a Polaris submarine after William Penn. You people, a lot of you from Philadelphia, you know what that means, right? William Penn was not seem appropriate to name a nuclear submarine. So he set the stage, JFK did. He said, that's, I assure you that will not be done. And then David Hartsough tells me, now David was only 22 at the time, and he was part of this 6-person Quaker delegation. He said, Kennedy listened to us. And his message was, the military-industrial complex is really, really strong. I face a lot of pressure, and it's up to you to create the countervailing pressure so I can do some good things here. So David Hartsough told me and others that. And the big thing for David was that John Kennedy was listening as much as he was talking. Now, again, that was May 1962. Then came the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of 1962. I remember it well. I reported for active duty at Fort Benning, Georgia, the Army Infantry Training Center on the 3rd of November, 1962. What was remarkable about that? There were no weapons there. Mind you, the Army Infantry Training Center with no weapons. So we finally got up the courage to ask somebody, where are the weapons? And we were told they're all in Key West. 2 divisions came through here 2 weeks ago, took them all down at Key West. They're ready to spring into Cuba, although it looks now as though that will not be necessary. That's how close I came to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, suffice it to say, everyone understands how traumatized President Kennedy was at that. It's one thing to talk about nuclear war. It's another thing to have, as one writer said, to experience this arms race and this threat in an existential way, huh? In other words, that's when these odd Quaker thoughts and Parchamenteris started being considered seriously by President Kennedy. Parchamenteris the following year. Well, let's take a look at April 1963 now. Parchamenteris on April 11th. What else was going on? Oh, wow. Kennedy had a secret correspondence with Khrushchev. Secret. Right. You do this through communicators. I doubt whether there were prying ears or eyes that were unaware of what was going on. And this raised suspicions among what we call the deep state. Kennedy wrote a secret letter to Khrushchev, and he said, quote, I'm aware of the private attacks on Soviet ships in Cuban waters. We're taking action to halt those attacks, end quote. Okay, wow. At the same time, in April of 1963, put yourself now in that period. Kennedy sent a presidential emissary to Cuba to get release of more of the hostages that had been taken, prisoners that had been taken during the Bay of Pigs fiasco. And guess what? The CIA tried to use this unwitting negotiator by giving him a poisoned diving suit to present to Castro, to assassinate him, blame it on Kennedy, and put the kibosh on any improvement with those commies in Cuba. That was the sentiment in those days. That is reality. And that's what Kennedy faced, not only from the military-industrial complex, but from the deep state, which is a very real part of the military-industrial complex, which we'll get to in just a second. About the speech, well, the speech was a magnificent speech. It was the best speech that any president ever gave. And he drew a distinction, Kennedy did. This was June 10th now at American University. So 2 months after the encyclical Parchamenteris. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered lacking in virtue. Now, that echoes Putcham and Terrace to fairly well. They both talked about mutual trust and cooperation between ideological opponents. Kennedy finished up, or in the speech, he says, "For in the final analysis, our most common basic link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal." So there you have the notion of interdependence so prevalent in Putcham and Terrace. Finally, another quote from the speech: "To make clear our good faith, I now declare that the U.S. does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere as long as other states do not do so. We will not be the first to resume such tests," end quote. Kennedy was reported to have told his brother Bobby, "Well, I think probably I need to, it would be appropriate to go to the theater tonight." The allusion being to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He faced such strong opposition from the military, from the intelligence people, from all who thought he was too soft on the commies. You can't make peace with the commies. A footnote here: the Pope died just a week before John Kennedy's speech, but I believe he heard it. He heard it anyway, and he heard the resonance coming from Putcham and Terrace. Now, when we talk about the military-industrial complex, you'll remember that Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex in his very last talk on his way out of the presidency. We can all be sure that he gave John Kennedy, his successor, chapter and verse on these dangers, okay? Matter of fact, I'm sure that Truman gave Eisenhower the same lecture about watch these guys. Truman later saying, "I created a Frankenstein in the CIA." So let's just take a look at how perspicacious Pope Francis is coming to the U.S. Congress in, I think it was 2015, to a joint session, and he gave a major speech. And what did he say? Well, I was asked by a Catholic news service to appeal to the Pope based on what he said previously. And I would ask if that 1 minute plus clip, could that be played now, Ben? No, I just would warn you, it's just 1 minute. So if you fall asleep, you'll miss the whole thing. And it's very, very important. Let me talk a little bit more. Ben, just show that whenever it's ready. What Eisenhower warned was, look, the military-industrial complex built up during World War II has become more powerful, whether the power is sought or unsought. And here it comes, the 1 minute video.
Your Holiness, I have no point we begin to know for our and that was at the end of the question pointed out called the real power. What you call the real power was the blood rendition on the spirit. Now, if you look at the conflict in Ukraine, you will see that the blood concentrated is the color. People are making on this floor. People appropriating money in the UN for vote are receiving approximately from this family. And this man is not. So I think this is to follow the political reversion of John Paul II. And Sunday, I'm sorry, that was the one before there's a little bit of explaining between Russia and the United States.
Well, I hope that you all could hear that better than I could. You didn't miss an awful lot. What I tried to do is to appeal to Pope Francis to make good on what he said before the Congress. And what he said before the Congress was the main problem is the blood-drenched arms trade. Whoa! Now, what happened? Oh, the congressmen and the senators all got up and oh, it was great applause. And then they looked in their pockets to see if the latest envelope from Raytheon was there, and the one from, oh yeah, that's still the one from Lockheed. Yeah, it was giving, it's giving cynicism, hypocrisy, a bad name. The Pope identified the problem, and they all clapped, and they're all on the take. And that explains, in large measure, why they want to throw good money after bad at Ukraine and at Israel. Now, I coined an acronym. It's in the dictionary now. I'm very proud of it. It's called the Mickey Mat. And it sort of rhymes a little bit with Mickey Mouse, so it's easy to remember. And what it stands for, if you have a pencil, this is on the final, okay? All right. It stands for the Military Industrial Congressional Intelligence Media Academia Think Tank Complex. Mickey Mat. Now, why do I say media? As if in all capital letters, because media is the linchpin, the cornerstone. Without the media, you can't do these things. Witness just, was it yesterday, the day before yesterday, Tucker Carlson interviewed the head of Russia for 2 hours. The media has not given you the chance to see it. Isn't that something, huh? Don't you want to hear what the president of Russia says? Okay, so that's just an example. Now, a friend of mine took a cotton to this Mickey Mat. Ben, if you have that next little clip from YouTube ready, I'll introduce it now, but feel free to start running it whenever you're ready. This is what he did. Watch carefully because it goes rather fast.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Ike was working in the White House late one night when his eyes beheld an eerie sight. The military complex began to rise, and suddenly, to his surprise, it did the Mick. It did the Monster Mick. The Monster Mick. It was a graveyard trick. It did the Mick. Eisenhower's speech. It was a Mick. Alert citizenry preach. 60 years have passed since Ike's farewell, and the Monster Mick has really swelled. The cancerous bodies have grown by 5. On greed and fear, the Mickey Mat thrives. It's now the Mickey Mat, the Monster Mick, and it's a graveyard trick. No, so as the blob, our children's futures rob. Each district has its working places to make hardware for arms races. Each district addicted by divide and rule. Military jobs, the Machiavellian tool. Oh, the Mickey Mac monster still expands. A surveillance state over all the land. Whistleblowers like Snowden, the Mickey Mac smears. Journalists like Assange, the Mickey Mac fears. It's now the Mickey Mac, and it's a graveyard trick. Clapper and Brennan lied. On Feinstein's Senate spied. The media hosts blob experts galore. Intelligence, military, they adore. On conflicted money, the media feeds. Conflicts of interest, no Mickey Mac heeds. It's now the Mickey Mac, and it's a graveyard trick. Call it disinformation, or merely obfuscation. Corrupted by grants and a blob career track. Academia recruits more to the pack. With think tank experts, the media spin, redefining a Mickey Mac win. It's now the Mickey Mac, and it's a graveyard trick. It wants total control. A monster with no soul. War is good. Easy, Mick, you exceptional Mickey Mac monster. War good.
Mickey Mac, whoa. Mickey Mac, whoa.
Are the wars in Israel?
Whoops. Please leave that on. Okay, that's okay. That's fine. At the very end, there's a 60-minute interview. Whoops.
We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense.
Okay. That's all right. Here's a 60 Minutes interviewer asking President Biden, are you sure that you could take on a war in Ukraine and a war in Southwest Asia at the same time? And pardon me for mimicking the president, but this is exactly how he come across to me. Huh? We're the United States of America, the most powerful country in the world, in the history of the world, in the history of the world. Those are his words. That's an attitude. That's a noxious, a very dangerous attitude, because when I was a kid after World War II, that was true. It was arguably true when the Soviet Union fell apart, but it ain't true any longer. And that attitude is going to get us in a peck of trouble if people don't start listening to people like my friend David Hartsoe of the Quakers and people like the Pope Francis, who can talk some sense into the blood-stained arms trade. Now, let me just finish up here, and on a more personal note, when my wife and I moved to a suburb of Washington outside of Virginia, we were a family of 3 2/3. Wife, Rita, my daughter, not yet 2 years old, and we were expecting a son. So we were there in a little apartment outside of Virginia, and at John Kennedy's funeral, my brother, Joe, and a classmate of his at Fordham came down. His classmate was John Quinn, and he was a poet. And they were there, and on their way back in their little Volkswagen Beetle, John Quinn penned this meditation. It's not very long. I'd like to finish with this and have you all meditate on its meaning. We remember the winter afternoon not quite 3 years ago, and the young man and the old man, and the old man speaking to the crowded people, talking about the inauguration, and the voice, of course, is Robert Frost. The young man had come to set his hand upon a book, to take an oath to the God of our founders, to pledge his heart and strength and youth to the keeping of a dream. And the old man, white-haired, had come to set a poet's gentle hand upon the day, coming from his distant Sabine farm with its conquered birches to read a verse in the sharp light of the winter sun. The old man is gone. But had he lived, he might have climbed again in his old man's tired way up the steps to face the people, and under the winter sky he might have changed a bit the verse he had spoken that other afternoon. And the tolling bell and the gun carriage rattle would be still, and the standard slack against the midpoint of its staff in no wind. And the old man sang as the young man passed in sleep. Such as he was, he gave of himself outright. God help him now and us. This is our prayer. So the funeral was on November 25th, 3 days after they killed our president. Going forward, one more trimester, our son was born exactly 60 years ago. And the question became, what do we name our son? And I felt like Elizabeth and Zechariah. Clearly, his name will be John. John after Pope John the 23rd. John after President John Kennedy. And also John after my wife's father, whose name was also John Kennedy. Those were the Kennedys of Brooklyn, not of Brookline. So let me close this now with an appeal to do more than rhetoric. It's time for winter soldiers, not sunshine patriots. I know some of us are a little long in the tooth, and if you have this kind of gray hair, well, let me suggest something, and I'll end with this. This is an advantage. You know why? Because if you want to block a Senate floor or challenge Hillary Clinton or some other warmonger from the audience, well, they're going to get you, but they're not going to beat you up real bad. You know why? Because Americans don't like to see old people get beaten up, right? I can tell you that from experience, although I have had a checkered experience on that. So what's the deal here? Young people, they got to come and tell them, beat them up, yeah. But old people have a disadvantage. All of you with this color hair ought to put that advantage into play. Look at the new interventions that are being done by young people when people with the authority, with the power to stop the carnage, to stop the genocide in Gaza. What they are doing, we need to do no less and give them good example. I thank you for listening. God bless.
We allocated time now for speakers, and I think Wendy has collected some. And one of the come here, tell us what he's come up with for our various.
The system is stronger than the individual. It's a belief in system therapy. How do we as individuals work together to change the system? In our church, in politics, and in our community. Right? Brother Mac, anybody want to try it?
He's reading. Okay.
I think that's certainly a good question. Explain it with me.
That my turn. That turn on the switching.
No, it's the lights on. All right. Well, it's the next question. Each one that we all struggle. And actually, that is part of the executive convention said. It's saying we can work together to institutions, to organizations, make this vision we are closer to being actualized. And one thing that I want to say right off the bat is it's not a short sprint. It's a battle. The system is complicated. Generally, we have to stay involved year after year. Not just day after day, week after week, year after year. And I do think the power comes from the grassroots up. That's why most like each day of ministry degree has been at the grassroots level. People. For about 46 years now. So, there is something that we call as common ethics. And a colleague will talk about that. I do think that one of the things that is actually people express they eventually respond. And so I think that's what we have. One focus area. So we are playing one money we use the social election after we had passed this what was getting for many neighbors. Over $300,000. And so then they were making the decisions and all out when the Senate. And if one of those notice to talk on that's the confidence in one of the regions. And the first photo counts that appears in the city is okay, well, we send it and we get it. Legal, of course, to see the one who pushes all. So they needed to join the peace. You know what the always say. Liberty on the darkness. 3 weeks later, it was Senate. Was our last program in New Jersey, saw the Senate.
Hey, Steve, I can't hear anything. It's much too blurry. Somebody needs to speak into the phone. You were also very blurry.
Okay, so what I hope that is
No, let's chat. It's not, he's not gonna make, I'm sending him audio, I don't know why here. Let's keep going.
okay, so it's not sorry about long. So on that day, 3 weeks, not a single motion is sent from the Senate. It's about our offer. Why? Doing this. Is in the different times, our state senators that why you vote that we will be the support. He said that about 1,000 homes, 90% of us eat. That's people power. That's what we do. We do several things that can make the problem. Okay.
All right, we have time for one more question. So can I direct this to Ray, if you can hear me?
We're not sure.
Okay. All right.
Ben, I can't hear anything coming through this stuff. Somebody needs to rephrase the questions and speak into the mic so I can hear it.
Okay, it seems that without the draft, young people don't seem that concerned with our military activities. What should we do about it? Just like me on the chat.
We're sending him audio. I don't know why he doesn't hear us. Sending audio, I see it. Chip pop up.
No way to communicate.
Hello?
Right, we're sending it to chat. You check your chat and see, send me questions. She's sending you questions. Can you hear? Can you check your chat and see anything?
Steve, I think you tried to call me just now, but you didn't get through. Could you try again?
Hello, Ray.
Yeah, maybe we could talk this way. Can you hear me, Steve? Hey, what's up?
All right, check your chat. We're gonna try through the phone. Here we go. Repeat the question. Stand right here.
It seems that without the draft, young people don't seem very concerned with our military activities. What should we do about that?
Ray, you there?
Yes, Maria Nando, I agree with. It's really hard to hear what's being said from that microphone. So if someone wants me to answer a question, some better way has to be found to make it intelligible on my end.
Check your chat. Check
Further down in the chat.
Check my what?
Through the chat.
Yeah, I got the chat up here, so I can see what's being said. And my response to what I heard, it starts with, it sounds like the interference on Zoom. All I can say is I agree. I can't hear anything that is intelligible on my end.
Scroll down to the next chat down.
All right. It seems to me that without the draft, young people do not seem very concerned with our military activities. What should we do? Well, a lot of my friends are in the high schools telling them, bringing veterans from Iraq, Afghanistan, even farther back, Vietnam, to tell kids, hey, this is what's really going on. This is what Henry Kissinger once called, soldiers are just pawns to be used on the chessboard of great politics. They really don't matter much. And of course, when now tomorrow we'll have the Super Bowl, right? Okay, now what will we have? We'll have peons or peons. Peons are the poverty draft that we have in this country, where people need 3 square meals and need an education and need some money, need employment, and so they join the Army. Don't tell me this is a volunteer exercise, okay? So peons, great praise. We'll have probably some jets showing pictures of these 3 all African Americans, of course, that were killed on the border of Syria and Jordan. And you'll have all kinds of clapping, just as was indicated in the last little segment of that Mickey Matt music that I showed. In other words, you'll have a great recruiting opportunity for these young kids who are impressionable. What we can do is try to talk to these kids and say, look, don't be deceived by this. There's no glory in killing other people, particularly when we have no business to be in other people's countries, which happens to be the case in Syria and arguably in Iraq.
Any next question?
Anyone?
That's it. That's it. Good.
We had seen this as a look at Hodgman Terrace and the lens of 3 faith traditions. We have a gentleman here for the 4th faith tradition. I wonder if you would care to say a few words to us. Would you care to speak to us? You. You, sir? Okay, you need one. All right. Thank you. Please fill out personal evaluations. I'm sure there was some comments and what's going forward. Thank you all for coming. Have a good day.